welcome to episode 22 of the Barndoor restoration. Last episode I covered this cross panel here, or splash panel. This episode I'm doing the underseat storage floor. I've been putting this piece off for a while because, not because it's overly complex, because I knew it was going to take some trial and error to get it right. So the space underneath the seat, some people call it the tool chest, toolbox. It's just a storage area. And the cover that goes on here basically has a big opening. So you flip your seat up, throw stuff in there, and put the seat down. It has a hole for the choke cable that comes up through. There'll be a rubber grommet around there, choke cable here. And it also has a slot for the two tubes for the heater control. So the heater control knob, when you spin it, pulls two cables that run through steel tubes, go to the back. It opens flaps to allow air off the exhaust to be pushed up. So they had a slot for that, and what they did is after the two tubes are run through, they put a plate on each side of it with two half circles cut out, slid it together and welded it. There's also a little stand here that holds a choke cable, so choke cable will clip in that and go through the hole. This panel has a slight bend in it. It tips down the back and has the 6 ribs stamped in it. So the issues this panel had, well, here's actually the parts that come off it. The back edge, where it sloped down, was completely rotted away. So I had to replace the back, which meant putting the ribs in. So my original thought was to use a bead roller. Now a bead roller works really good on thinner metal, 22 gauge, 20 gauge. This is 1.2 millimeter, so approximately 18 gauge. Which is a little difficult for my cheap bead roller. So what I did, I took a piece of metal and I ran it through my English wheel just enough to thin it, stretch the metal slightly, and then bead roll over that stretched metal to make it easier to bead roll. So that worked pretty well. The trick with the bead roller, especially on thicker metal, is just go slow, back and forth, add a little pressure, back and forth. The difficult part to do is to get nice sharp bends. And with the thick metal, it's more of a problem because the metal just kind of likes to curve instead of bending sharp. And I had 3D printed dies for the bead roller to match the shape perfectly. So I did get the first rib shaped nicely, but I wasn't confident my 3D printed dies were going to hold up to do all 6. I kind of thought the edges were going to round over, and I start to lose the definition of the rib. Now, the other issue with the bead rolling is the termination at the end. It just, because the ribs don't go right to the end of the panel, I was stopping, which left the metal kind of all buckled. I was going to have to either hand shape that termination or stamp that end. So after doing the first one, I realized how long it was going to take and the issues. I decided it's probably going to be easier just to stamp the ribs in. So, using scrap metal that was kicking around, I made a die. So basically, there's a female side and a male side to the die. And the female side is the size of the upper part of the rib, and the male side is the bottom of the rib. And there was a alignment, the fingers in the back, and then I had a drill bit in the front. What I usually like to do is use a drill bit, drill through both pieces, and then use that as an alignment pin. The trick with doing dies is to make sure that they're aligned perfectly. If they're off just a millimeter, it'll look terrible. It'll really show a lot. So alignment pins are very important. So I did some test stampings, and I had to narrow the female die in on the end because I was stamping one end was open. The metal liked to spring back. In order to keep the width, I had to narrow it down so it made it so when it sprung back, it kept the right width to match the other panel. So it took a little bit of trial and error to get a proper shape, to get it perfect. Once I did, it was very quick, and it gave me a very nice termination on the end. So I was able to stamp the 6. Oh, another thing I should mention is when you stamp it, especially open like this, you get a lot of shrinkage on the metal. So before stamping this one in, I measured across the panel, stamped it in, and then measured it. And this one, it's narrowed it by 2.5 millimeters. So that meant when I put my next rib in, marked it, I'd have to move it over half that further out to make up for how much it was going to shrink. And that worked well, so I got all 6 in. Well, I got 5 in perfectly. The 6th one, I got my marking wrong on one end and ended up about 3 millimeters wide at the top. So I just had to cut the panel, bring it together, and re-weld it. So down that one. It wasn't a big deal. It was a little annoying, but it wasn't a big deal. So once the ribs were stamped, I had to figure out how I was going to fit this, get everything lined up. And because the panel, the way it's shaped, it's got a bend in it, I needed exactly the right length and width, and I didn't want to get it all warped. So I decided the easiest way to make all that work is to build a little jig to clamp stuff to. So a little small jig, so I clamp the original panel to it, and then clamp my new piece to it, and then measure, make sure everything was perfect, and then I can mark and fit everything. I like to have the metal fit almost touching, but not quite. You don't want it catching, because when you start to weld, it shrinks a bit, and you end up with the metal over top, and you can't get it back down. So if you have a slight gap, you can tack it together and without it catching. And if it does start to, you can usually dolly the tacks a bit, and it'll spread it out. So basically, you just kind of tack it across and then weld it full in. I had to add lips on the sides here because I cut those off, and having the jig allowed me to clamp them, knowing they're in the correct spot. And then I could double check my measurements to make sure everything was right. So I just welded everything, ground everything down. When I grind my welds, I don't grind them all the way down. I leave them just a little bit out, and then I make sure the panel is nice and flat. I don't have any spots that are warped, and if they do, I can just dolly that weld a bit to pull the warp back out, expand the metal a bit. And once I'm happy with it, then I'll go through and smooth the welds down. Media blast it and throw a coat of zinc on it, keep it from rusting. So I guess that's about it for this episode. Keep watching for some video of the work on this panel. And I do cover the bead rolling and the stamping and the welding. There's also videos of the details of this panel. I upload drawings to this to GrabCAD. The link in the description for that. Next episode, I gotta finish these side panels off. There's a bunch of details to add to them. This side still needs the ribs added in. So I want to get those done. I want to work towards getting this welded together, so we get all the parts done. So if you're interested in seeing that, please subscribe so you don't miss it. No, thanks for watching.